Imagine this. A bronze knife presses against your skin. The blade is cold. Then it cuts. You're not a prisoner. You're not being tortured. You paid for this. It's 175 BC in Jerusalem. You're lying on a table undergoing a brutal procedure called epispasm, a surgery designed to reverse your circumcision. You are literally trying to erase the physical mark of your covenant with God. Why? Because you want to walk naked into a Greek gymnasium without being laughed at. You want to blend in. You want to be accepted. You want to hide who you are. That blood on the floor, that humiliation, that desperation, that's the real spark of the Maccabean Revolt. History textbooks will tell you this was a war against a powerful empire, a clean story, oppressor versus oppressed. But that's not how it started. It began as something far more uncomfortable, a civil war within the Jewish people themselves, a war over identity, a war over whether survival meant assimilation. Before we go deeper into this story of survival, compromise, and rebellion, if you're drawn to the hidden layers of history, the parts that don't make it into simple timelines, make sure you're subscribed. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible to think that we're piecing together ancient Jerusalem from all corners of the world. Now here's the truth. The destruction of Judea didn't begin with a battle. It began with a bribe. The weapon wasn't a sword. It was Hellenization, the spread of Greek culture. And it didn't come from the outside first. It came from the top. The Jewish elite didn't just admire Greek culture. They embraced it. Some of them believed their own traditions were backward, even embarrassing. Greek philosophy, Greek athletics, Greek politics. That was modern, sophisticated, powerful. Their own faith? That was the past. The rot began at the highest office in the land, the high priesthood. A man named Jason, brother of the sitting high priest, approached the Seleucid king, Antiochus IV. He didn't ask for protection. He didn't plead for autonomy. He offered money. A mountain of silver in exchange for the position of high priest. Antiochus accepted. The cash changed hands. Jason became high priest. And almost immediately, he built a Greek gymnasium right next to the Holy Temple. Priests who once tended the altar started attending wrestling matches. The scent of incense was replaced with sweat and sand. The sacred oil gave way to discus throwing and philosophy lectures. But corruption doesn't sit still. 3 years later, another man, Menelaus, outbid Jason for the position. There was just one problem. He didn't actually have the money, so he stole it. He looted the temple treasury, stripping it of sacred gold vessels to pay off the king. The house of God became his personal bank account. When people protested, Menelaus had the former high priest murdered. Jerusalem exploded. Not in rebellion against Greece, but in civil war. Traditionalists clashed with Hellenizers in the streets. The city was tearing itself apart from within. And that's when the real monster entered the story. Antiochus IV returned from a failed campaign in Egypt. He was humiliated, he was broke, and he was furious. When he saw unrest in Jerusalem, he didn't see internal conflict. He saw rebellion. He didn't send negotiators. He sent soldiers. What followed was a nightmare. Seleucid troops stormed the city and turned it into a slaughterhouse. In just 3 days, 80,000 people were killed. 40,000 more were chained and sold into slavery. The gutters ran red, but Antiochus wasn't finished. He marched straight into the temple, stepped over the bodies of priests, entered the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space in Judaism. He stripped the gold from the walls, stole the menorah, emptied the treasury. Then came the decrees. The Jewish religion was outlawed. No Sabbath, no Torah, no circumcision. Death penalty. Soldiers went door to door. They found two mothers who had secretly circumcised their sons. They didn't arrest them. They tied the babies around the mothers' necks, marched them to the highest wall in the city, and threw them off. Obey or die. If the massacre was the physical blow, what came next was spiritual annihilation. On the 25th of Kislev, 167 BC, Antiochus did something unprecedented. He didn't just shut the temple down, he redesigned it. Soldiers hauled a massive statue into the inner sanctuary. It was Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. But the face wasn't quite Zeus. It was Antiochus. He installed himself as a god inside the house of Yahweh. And then, in an act meant to wound at the deepest possible level, they brought a pig to the altar. The animal considered the ultimate impurity under Jewish law. They slaughtered it on the sacred stones. They didn't stop there. They took the broth from its flesh and splashed it across the holy scrolls, the walls, the floor. They baptized the temple in defilement. The prophet Daniel would later call this the abomination of desolation. This wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated psychological warfare. Without a pure temple, there are no sacrifices. Without sacrifices, there is no atonement. Without atonement, the covenant itself feels broken. Antiochus wasn't just conquering territory. He was trying to dismantle identity. So who was this man? His coins called him Theos Epiphanes, God manifest. He believed he was divine. But behind his back, people changed one letter. Epimanes, the madman. He was brilliant, unpredictable, and dangerously insecure. He would dress in Roman togas and run for fake political offices in his own capital. Play pranks in bathhouses one day, order executions the next. His dream was unity. One empire, one language, one culture, one set of gods. And the Jews, stubborn, different, monotheistic, were the stain he couldn't scrub out. So he turned Jerusalem into a prison. He built a fortress called the Acra overlooking the temple, a looming citadel packed with Macedonian soldiers and Jewish collaborators. From its towers, arrows could be fired at anyone who tried to approach the ruins to pray. The shadow of the Acra fell directly over the Temple Mount, a symbol. God had left the building, and the persecution didn't stop in Jerusalem. It spread outward like a shockwave. Antiochus sent roaming inspection squads into the countryside, religious enforcers with swords. They would enter villages, erect portable altars to Zeus, and gather the townspeople. The test was simple. Eat pork or die. Sacrifice or watch your children bleed. At first, the response wasn't rebellion. It was martyrdom. This is the part people skip. Before they fought, they died. 1,000 Jews fled into caves in the Judean wilderness to keep the Sabbath in peace. Seleucid soldiers tracked them down on a Saturday. The captain offered mercy. Come out, eat pork, live. The people inside refused, but they also refused to fight. It was the Sabbath. To lift a weapon would break God's law. So when soldiers piled wood at the cave entrance and set it on fire, they didn't resist. They sat in the dark, holding their children, singing prayers as the smoke filled their lungs. They burned alive rather than violate the Sabbath. Antiochus heard the reports and laughed. He thought he had won. He believed he was dealing with a people too pious to survive. What he didn't understand was this. When you push a people into a corner long enough, eventually, someone decides that survival itself is sacred. And in a small town called Modian, an old priest named Mattathias was about to make that decision. The age of martyrdom was ending. The age of the hammer was about to begin. The Seleucid inspectors arrived in Modian on an ordinary afternoon. It was the kind of town armies usually ignored. A handful of stone houses in the foothills. Farmers, shepherds, nothing strategic, nothing glamorous. They assumed this would be routine. Set up the portable altar, gather the villagers, make an example of someone, move on. In the center of the village square, they erected an altar to Zeus. Then they called forward the most respected man in town, an elderly priest named Mattathias. Mattathias was tired. He had retreated to Modian with his 5 sons to escape the chaos in Jerusalem. He had seen the temple looted. He had heard about the mothers thrown from the walls. He had watched his nation fracture. Now the empire stood in his village. The Seleucid official smiled at him like a man offering a business deal. "Be the first," he said. "Step forward. Offer the sacrifice. You and your sons will be honored. Silver, gold. You'll be called friends of the king." It was a standard bribe. In dozens of other villages, it had worked. But Mattathias raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Even if all the nations that live under the king's rule obey him, my sons and I will walk in the covenant of our fathers." The square went silent. The official's hand drifted toward his sword. But before the confrontation could ignite between Greek authority and Jewish priest, something else happened. A Jewish man from the crowd stepped forward. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he just wanted to save his family. Maybe he believed compromise was survival. He approached the altar, took the knife, prepared to perform the sacrifice, and something snapped inside Mattathias. He had endured humiliation. He had endured fear. He had endured reports of slaughter. But watching a fellow Jew publicly betray the covenant in his own village, that was the breaking point. The ancient text says, "His zeal was kindled." He didn't shout. He moved. Mattathias lunged forward and drove his dagger into the Jewish collaborator first. Not the Greek, the collaborator. Then he turned and killed the king's official. His sons, Simon, Eleazar, John, Jonathan, and Judah, were ready. They cut down the remaining soldiers before the garrison could react. It was over in seconds. The altar lay overturned. Dust mixed with blood in the village square. Mattathias stood there breathing hard, fully aware of what he had just done. There was no undoing this. The empire would not negotiate. A legion would come. So he turned to the stunned villagers and shouted words that would echo through history. "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and stands by the covenant follow me." They didn't pack supplies. They didn't say goodbye. They ran. Mattathias and his sons fled into the Gophna hills, living in caves like fugitives. But this time was different from the earlier martyrs. A question quickly arose. If we are attacked on the Sabbath, do we fight? Previously, others had chosen not to, and they had died. Mattathias made a radical ruling. "If we do not fight," he said, "we will all be destroyed, and there will be no one left to keep the Sabbath." Survival became a sacred act. It was a theological shift that changed everything. Word spread quickly. The Hasidians, fierce traditionalists, began to join them in the hills. Farmers, priests, men with no armor and barely any weapons. They carried farming tools, scavenged swords, whatever they could find. But they had conviction. The early phase of the revolt wasn't grand battlefield glory. It was night raids. Mattathias and his band would descend on villages that had surrendered to Greek practices. They tore down pagan altars. They circumcised boys whose parents had been too afraid. They executed collaborators. It was messy, brutal. Civil war rarely looks noble, but it worked. Village by village, resistance spread. Then, a year into the rebellion, Mattathias fell ill. On his deathbed, he gathered his 5 sons. He praised Simon's wisdom, Eleazar's strength, Jonathan's resilience. But when it came time to name a leader, his eyes settled on Judah. Judah wasn't the oldest, but he had fire. Mattathias told them, "Give your lives for the covenant of our fathers." Then he appointed Judah as commander. Shortly after, he died. The rebels were now led by a priest's son with no formal military training, facing one of the most powerful empires on earth. Judah's nickname would soon define him: Maccabee, the hammer. No one knows for certain where the name comes from. Some say it's an acronym for a Hebrew phrase. Others say it simply means what it sounds like: a hammer. Blunt, direct, crushing. Judah understood something immediately. If he met the Seleucid army in open plains, he would be annihilated. Greek warfare was built around the phalanx, tight formations of heavily armored soldiers with 16-foot spears. In a straight fight, the rebels stood no chance. So Judah refused to fight straight. He studied the hills like a weapon. Every cave, every narrow pass, every ravine. Strike fast, strike hard, disappear. The first test came from Apollonius, the Seleucid governor of Samaria. Apollonius didn't respect the rebels. To him, they were angry peasants with pitchforks. He assembled a sizable force and marched south to crush them. On his way, he chose a route through Wadi el-Haramaya, a narrow canyon with steep rock walls. It was a fatal mistake. Judah positioned his men high along the ridges, hidden among rocks and scrub brush. They waited until the Seleucid column stretched deep into the ravine, thin and vulnerable. Then came the signal. Boulders thundered down from above. Arrows rained into the trapped soldiers. Before the Greeks could form ranks, rebels descended from both sides. The phalanx is powerful facing forward. It is useless when attacked from every direction in a confined space. Spears became cumbersome poles. Soldiers couldn't maneuver. Panic rippled through the line. Judah pushed through the chaos toward one target: Apollonius. The details of their duel are lost to history, but the outcome isn't. Judah killed him. Then he did something symbolic. He took the governor's sword. It was superior steel, well-balanced, far better than anything the rebels possessed. Judah strapped it to his waist. From that day on, he carried the sword of the first general he killed. It was a message. We will arm ourselves from our enemies. The empire was shaken, but not yet alarmed. They blamed incompetence. So they sent someone more serious: General Seron. Unlike Apollonius, Seron commanded professional troops. He marched toward Judea confident that he would restore order quickly. This time, he avoided the canyon. He chose the Beth Horon ascent, a steep, winding climb from the coastal plains up to the Judean plateau. Judah waited at the top. When his men saw the size and discipline of Seron's army, fear crept in. "How can we fight such a multitude?" they asked. Judah didn't respond with tactics. He responded with conviction. "Victory does not depend on numbers," he told them, hand resting on Apollonius's sword. "They fight to destroy us and our children. We fight for our lives and our laws." Then he waited. The Beth Horon ascent was brutal for heavy infantry. Soldiers climbed in armor under the scorching sun, pikes wobbling, formation stretching thin. By the time Seron's vanguard reached the top, They were exhausted and disorganized. Judah gave the order. The rebels charged downhill. In ancient warfare, gravity is a weapon. The impact shattered the front line. Retreating soldiers crashed into advancing ones behind them. The tight phalanx collapsed into chaos. Saron was cut down. 800 soldiers died in minutes. The rest fled. Twice now, Judah had humiliated the empire. But victory has consequences. The police action phase was over. This was now open rebellion. And in Antioch, the king's fury was reaching a boiling point. He would not send another governor. He would send an army. The real war was about to begin. When news of the defeats reached Antioch, King Antiochus IV reportedly froze with rage. This was no longer a nuisance. This was no longer a religious squabble in the hills. This was a threat to imperial stability. He emptied the treasury. He authorized a campaign so massive it could bankrupt the state. But Antiochus couldn't lead it himself. He had rebellions to crush in the east. So he appointed his most trusted kinsman, Lysias, as regent. The order he gave was chillingly clear. Wipe out their memory from the land. This wasn't about control anymore. It was extermination. Lysias assembled a force unlike anything the rebels had faced. 40,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry, and war elephants. The tanks of the ancient world. The army was placed under 3 elite generals, Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias. They camped at Emmaus. When Judah's scouts saw the scale of the enemy, dread settled in. The rebels numbered barely 3,000. Farmers, shepherds, men with stolen swords. The math was impossible. Judah gathered his men at Mizpah, overlooking Jerusalem. Smoke rose from the occupied city. They tore their clothes, scattered ashes on their heads, opened the Torah scrolls. It felt less like a strategy meeting and more like a funeral. Then Judah did something that shocked everyone. He began sending men home. Who has built a new house? Go home. Who has planted a vineyard? Go home. Who is engaged to be married? Go home. Who is afraid? Go home. Facing annihilation, Judah deliberately reduced his army. He understood something critical. Fear spreads faster than courage. When he was finished, 3,000 remained. Meanwhile, the Seleucid camp at Emmaus had become a floating marketplace. Merchants arrived with chains and shackles, already posting prices for Jewish slaves. Victory was assumed. General Gorgias decided to end the rebellion in one night. His spies had located Judah's camp. He selected 5,000 infantry and 1,000 elite cavalry for a night raid. Silent, decisive, professional. What Gorgias didn't know was that Judah already knew. As Gorgias marched into the hills, Judah did something that still terrifies military historians. He marched straight past him. While 6,000 elite troops climbed toward empty tents, Judah led his 3,000 men down into the valley, toward the undefended main camp. 2 armies passed each other in the dark. At dawn, Gorgias stormed Judah's camp. It was empty. Assuming the rebels had fled deeper into the wilderness, he pursued them, marching his elite force even farther from Emmaus. Down below, as the sky turned gray, Judah stood overlooking the Seleucid camp. Thousands of tents, soldiers waking up, unarmored, unprepared. Judah raised the sword of Apollonius. Then the shofar sounded. 3,000 men charged, screaming out of the mist. It wasn't a battle. It was panic. Judah's men didn't try to fight the army head-on. They set fires. Canvas tents went up instantly. Smoke filled the camp. Mercenaries fought shadows and each other. Within an hour, the Seleucid army collapsed. 40,000 soldiers fled, abandoning supplies, weapons, and gold. Then Judah stopped the celebration. There is still a battle before us. High in the hills, Gorgias was returning. When his men crested the ridge, they saw smoke, bodies, ruins, and Judah standing in formation. Morale shattered instantly. The elite force turned and fled without a fight. With 3,000 men, Judah had defeated 47,000. The rebels now possessed weapons, food, and wealth. They marched, not to the caves, but to Jerusalem. When they reached the city, the cheering stopped. The temple was a ruin. Weeds choked the courtyards. Gates were burned black. And inside the sanctuary stood the statue of Zeus. Judah ordered the cleansing to begin. They tore down pagan structures, scrubbed blood from the floors. When they reached the altar, defiled by pig sacrifice, they faced a crisis. The stones were holy, but irredeemably impure. So they dismantled the altar and buried the stones, waiting for a future prophet to decide their fate. They built a new altar. They made new vessels. Then came the dedication. Hanukkah. The book of Maccabees doesn't mention a miracle of oil. Instead, it explains the 8 days simply. The people had missed Sukkot while hiding in caves, so they celebrated it late. The oil story came centuries later, when rabbis reframed the holiday away from military power and toward divine light. But on that first night, there was no legend, only trembling hands lighting the menorah in a reclaimed sanctuary. Hanukkah means dedication, not victory, not conquest, dedication. But the war wasn't over. In 162 BC, the Seleucids returned, with 32 war elephants. At Beth Zechariah, Judah's tactics failed. You can't ambush an elephant in an open field. During the chaos, Judah's brother Eleazar charged one of the beasts, drove his spear into its belly, and was crushed beneath it as it fell. Heroism and futility in one moment. Judah was forced to retreat. Jerusalem was besieged again. The rebels were starving. They were saved only by political chaos in Antioch. A temporary peace was signed. Religious freedom was restored. Most would have stopped there. Judah didn't. He knew freedom could be revoked, so he kept fighting. Support fractured. Numbers dwindled. In 160 BC, at the Battle of Emmaus, Judah faced 20,000 troops with only 800 men. His officers begged him to retreat. Judah refused. "If our time has come," he said, "let us die honorably." He fought fiercely, broke the enemy's right flank, but was surrounded. The hammer fell for the last time. Judah Maccabee was killed. To the world, the revolt looked finished, but martyrs outlived generals. Judah's brothers turned to diplomacy, playing rival Seleucid claimants against each other. By 142 BC, Judea achieved independence. The Hasmonean dynasty was born, and then, slowly, it became everything it once fought. Greek names, mercenaries, corruption. Eventually, Rome walked in. So was it all for nothing? No. Without the Maccabees, Judaism likely wouldn't exist. And without Judaism, there is no Christianity, no Islam, no monotheistic world as we know it. Empires crumble, candles endure. Tonight, somewhere, a small flame burns in a window. It says what armies couldn't erase. We are still here,